You have found the portal into the Laughing Stoic Buddha universe. LSB podcast with Nick Bibeau.
You could leave life right now. Let that determine what you do and say and think.
Acquire and arrive at is based on having never left. Yeah, just chilled out because.
Jazz, welcome to the Laughing Stoic Buddha podcast.
Hey there. It's
Hey.
good to be here.
I've been looking forward to this. We've talked mostly through Twitter. We had one very good phone conversation. I think was supposed to be 15 minutes and went like way over 45, or just, it was one of those timeless conversations. And I knew pretty early on that I had to get you on the podcast because we vibe a lot, and you're touching on a lot of similar ideas and threads that I touch on in my work. And so we're going to explore a lot of that and have some fun. So how's that sound?
I am so down. Let's do it.
Cool. Right on. I'll just go at the beginning. The first thing that inspired me to reach out to you was you did a post on doing LSD, psychedelic.
Mm-hmm.
The name of the podcast is Laughing Stoic Buddha, which I abbreviate to LSB. And the reason I went with that was because it's one letter off from LSD. It's one of those names that like encapsulated so much, because it's laughing. I laugh a lot, like more than almost anyone I know. It's kind of a problem. Buddhism, Stoicism, and then also the acronym being one off from LSD. Psychedelics have been a huge teacher for me, a huge medicine for me. And there's, even in the world of social media, people talking about their life changing from psychedelics. I would say it's kind of a coin flip for me. It's 50-50, that even them sharing that really touches me in a genuine way, where I go, oh yeah, no, they didn't just sort of have this sensationalist experience. You know, people can come out the other side of that on a real ego trip of like, oh, I got the truth and everybody who else didn't. But your post that I read was a lot more personal, of like, I had these blocks, these character habits that I didn't even know were habits. They were just so ingrained, and you were living from them. And then what good psychedelic experiences do, what good spiritual transcendence experiences do, is they give you some space from it. And all of a sudden you go, oh, I thought this was just me, but this is just a pattern, or this is just a habit that was ingrained, you know, when I was very young, or something I used to protect myself, or, you know, all the different manifestations of it. So that's what inspired me originally. We had a really good phone conversation. Never got into the LSD experience that much. We decided to save it for the podcast. So let's, wherever you would like to start, let's talk about how your LSD experience changed your life and your perspective.
Let's do it. Okay, loaded question. So where to begin? So I'll say I've done LSD a number of times in my life. So I'm going to start from the present and go backwards. But I usually kind of reserve it for those periods of time where I'm especially stuck. I think psychedelics in general, in particular, my favorite is LSD, helps you to get unstuck. I think it serves a number of roles for different people, but let me take a step back and kind of talk about how I ended up trying it and becoming an advocate for it. So about 5 years ago, I'm trying to remember, I was living in New York City, and throughout the period of living in New York City, I had a number of roommates. So initially, I'm going to go on a sidetrack here, but I fell in love with this apartment in the Lower East Side. It had gorgeous views of the East River in Brooklyn. And the person who posted the apartment was a gay man. And I was like, I've never lived with a man before. So I went into it with a grain of salt. And to this day, we ended up becoming best friends. And fast forward, I held on to that apartment for a number of years. And people would move out and I'd have to find roommates. And so I went from living with two gay guys to, over the years, living with all straight guys. again, something I never in a million years thought I would ever do because I had only lived with women in college. Um, but I always picked my roommates based on their personality. It wasn't like a gender preference or anything like that. So I just happened to live with some of the coolest people who I'm friends with to this day. And a particular time of my life was when I lived for 2 years with these guys who were a couple years older than me, were brilliant. One of them went to Harvard. They worked really dope jobs. They lived this glamorous sort of like high functioning lifestyle in New York City, right? The
Yes,
epitome
that's
of
very
what
New York. Yes.
one considers success. And until that point, my exposure to drugs had always been drugs are bad, like coke is bad. I knew a ton of coke addicts. I knew friends who dated coke addicts, and like I just considered all drugs in that category of bad.
Mm-hmm.
And then so hallucinogenics came with perceived stigma for me, as it does with most people, right? Most people think of it as ooh, scary, bad. That changed when I lived with them. These guys would pop a tab of LSD and take a 24-hour flight to Tokyo and be back 3 days later. They would do some of the coolest things that I was like, whoa, that's ballsy. And they were not what I considered a druggie. They were high functioning. They were really cerebral. They were deep. I would have awesome like late night conversations with them. They're friends of mine to this day. And the way they celebrated life is what I would call it, caused me to question like, why are they like that? You know? And so I started getting ingrained into their group of friends, and I would meet a bunch of their guy friends and all, and I'd have conversations with them. And one conversation kind of completely changed the game for me. It was one of their friends, and he was talking about how LSD had changed his life. And basically, before trying it, he was extremely stuck. He was in a living situation he hated. Like he didn't like his apartment, didn't like his roommate. He hated his job, and he was in a crappy relationship. And just going on his first trip completely just did a 180 for him. It wasn't like in the moment, but it was significantly after or subsequently after he just changed his life. And it didn't really make sense to me. I was like, okay, like that's so cool. I don't understand the how. So I decided to do some research, and my roommate put me onto the book, How to Change Your Mind by Michael Pollan, which is like some Harvard dude who tries it on himself and kind of documents the whole experience. And the book is kind of thick, like it's kind of hard to get through.
Yeah, he actually not to brag, but he lives right down the street from me here in Berkeley. I see him at coffee shops and bookstores all the time, and I always go, Michael, I love your books, man. He's written a lot of other really good stuff too. He writes about food a lot, but yes, he's awesome. I totally love the book. Highly recommend it.
Yeah, it's so that book is what did it for me. I'm a person that I need to do my research. I can't. Of course, word of mouth is first and foremost most important to me, but I need to know what I'm signing up for. So fast forward, I decided to go on my first trip, and actually, let me take one more step back. The part of the reason why I wanted to go on it was I was feeling very stuck. I was in a very toxic situationship that was lasting over 2+ years. And when I say really toxic, I was tolerating behavior that I didn't even recognize myself. Like, who is this person acting this way? It didn't feel like me. And then I was in a corporate job that I had really loved when I first started, and then I just kind of stuck around for 4 years, longer than I wanted to. And I didn't have didn't have it in me to leave, even though I wanted to. And those are like the two main things I would say. Aside from that, I also have had chronic depression and anxiety since high school or college, probably even before, but I didn't have that self-awareness to realize what it was. And I'd say it runs in my family. So I was well aware of things I wanted to fix, but and I was trying all the things. I went to therapy, I journaled, I did a lot of exercise, I tried everything, and I still stuck. So I decided to go on LSD. And feel free to interrupt me at any point because I can talk.
No,
so I decided to go on LSD.
It's been great so far. Keep rolling.
Okay. And I decided to take it with my roommate. I was like, I trust you. We're like BFFs, and like, you know my story, I know your story. And I was like, I want you to sort of babysit me on my first trip. Yes, trip sitting. So
great call, by the way.
He was like super down, and I was like, well, maybe you should not do it, so you're super, aware. And he's like, don't worry, it'll be fine. I'm like, okay. So he packs a backpack, and I think I did it on my birthday in November. So it was like probably like 4 or 5 years ago. And the thing about trips is that you have to have a proper set and setting, and Michael Pollan gets into this into his book. All of that is key. So we decided to go to Roosevelt Island, which is the small island in between Manhattan and Queens. And you take the tram, like this, it's like a above ground sort of, I don't even know what to call it, kind of like a trolley, but above ground kind of system. And we take the tab at like 10 a.m. You just put it under your tongue and you wait. Oh, and I had a brand new puppy, a 10-week-old puppy. And Krish, my roommate, insisted, bring Leo. You're gonna, in case you need him, he will, in case you have any sort of off moments, Leo will ground you. I didn't really understand at the time, but so I brought Leo, my dog. And so I'm with my puppy and my roommate, and we get to Roosevelt Island, and it's just this like scenic green area. There's a university. There's like Cornell University Tech has a campus there. So there's like people, residences, like campus, all of that. But there's a lot of greenery. And so the LSD starts to kick in. And the best way I would describe it is it's almost like you're in a video game. You're in a simulation, and everything is heightened. Your sense of sight, your sense of smell. And the beautiful part of it is you're fully present. So it's almost like you can isolate just one sense. So for me, it was all about the vision. Like, what the hell am I seeing in front of me? And so I'm across the island from Manhattan and downtown Manhattan, and I'm seeing all these buildings. And I literally felt like I had this ability to, just with my eyes alone, zoom in on any of the buildings and like check out the architecture. I'm really into architecture and all of that. So I was like, just honing in on all these fine details of buildings. So something that you typically can't do with your senses because the buildings are so far away. And it's very just a sensory experience. There's like, I didn't have a lot of like demons or ghosts necessarily come out, but I will say the experience is 8 hours and it feels like 6 days in one. I don't know how to describe it, but every new, let's say you just walk 100 yards and you're in a new environment, like, there's more hills or more concrete, whatever it is, feels completely different. And all sense of time is lost. And, I could get into the science and what Michael Pollan explains, the neuroscience behind what's going on in your brain. But, I will not go into that for right now. But I will say the trip was, during the trip, I made it an intentional decision beforehand to think about my problems. People don't always have to do that. It's not like a requirement, but I was like, I want to think about it. And during the trip, I delved into my relationship with my roommate. I talked about it with him and like, why I was feeling stuck, things like that. And I would have moments where I would go down a rabbit hole. And going down a rabbit hole is pretty much like, you have this negative thought and then it leads to this negative thought and you're like, oh, that, then you equate that thought to something about you. And it's just this like circle jerk of awful feelings. And you continue to rationalize and go down this rabbit hole. And that's when Krish was like, pet Leo, pet Leo. And I pet him, completely forgot about it. And it felt like 25 minutes of me talking about this situation. It probably was 5. I have no idea. I don't think anyone could do justice to what LSD feels like, but I will just say after that moment, after going on the trip, and we did Roosevelt Island, we ended up going to Times Square. Krish brought this giant speaker on his shoulder, and I was like, "Why do you have this speaker? I don't want to be the center of attention." And he's like, "Trust me, you're gonna love it." Blaring music through Times Square on his shoulder. I was like, "Who are we right now?"
Cool. That sounds so cool.
And we ended up at a bar. Then later we went back to our apartment, smoked a little because smoking can reignite some of the feeling of LSD. It was a long day in November and it was freezing. So I would say time it for when there's good weather. But long story short, I will say after that moment, so that was November, I ended up leaving my consulting firm at March. So 5 months later, and I cut off the guy that I was in a situationship with for my best friend told me, just do it for 3 months. You can do no contact. And I was like, 3 months, I can do it. Cut him off and never looked back, like completely cut him out of my life. Not to say he hasn't still tried to contact me to this day, but I have no attachment to anymore. And I
Yeah.
think LSD there's something very magical about what it does with your attachments or your
Yes.
perceived attachments to things in life.
100%. Yeah.
Um, and it was just a game changer. So I'm gonna pause there. I
Wow.
know I said a lot.
No, you told a beautiful story, actually. You walked us right through your trip, everything that led up to it. The trip sounded like such a beautiful, magical day. There's so much that I would like to touch on there. I would like to commend your roommate, friend, Krish. Did I get his name right?
Mhm.
Krishna. Yeah, very very nice. I got a Krish in my life too. That he did a really good job of trip sitting. I would highly recommend anyone that wants to do a psychedelic, LSD, mushrooms. Doing it alone is rough. Especially if it's
Mhm.
your first time, especially if you're in public, even if you're alone. It's just it's really good to have an experienced tripper. We call them psychonauts, right? People that dive into the psyche often.
Right.
I had a good trip sitter my first time, and I've been a trip sitter for others. And there is some debate as far as whether or not the trip sitter does a low dose themselves, to kind of be in the water. Personally, I like it. I feel confident. I haven't had, knock on wood, any bad trips really in my life. The only bad trips I've had have been on edible weed, marijuana. I've had some bad trips by eating too much weed, but never off LSD or mushrooms. Yeah, so I would like to commend him. He sounded like he did a great job. Great call to bring the dog as an anchor, as a comfort animal, true comfort animal, um, support animal. And yeah, what a great story. And there's a lot that I'd like to touch on. Two things that come to mind. The sensory experience that you're explaining is
Hmm.
something that's really cool on psychedelics, both LSD and mushrooms. That, like, when you're looking at those buildings, when you're appreciating these details and seeing things, like you said, almost like they're in a video game or like some sort of a simulation. What I'll often do when I'm tripping hard and I'm looking at stuff is there's a part of my brain that'll go, I know this is available in sober reality too, right? I
Hmm.
know the same world is here,
Right.
but what's the difference? And I'm going to be a very poor man's version of a neuroscientist because I'm not. I read. I've read Michael Pollan. We talked a little bit about Sam Harris. Maybe we'll touch on him a little later too. But I'm not a neuroscientist. You said you studied neuroscience in college. Is that right?
Yeah, it was
Um,
my major. I was pre-med at the time. So, and
okay.
I just love anything regarding the brain.
Right
So,
on. We'll have to get into that some more. But so, as a poor man's neuroscientist, more speaking at a metaphor or analogy level, one of the things that psychedelics do, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, is you actually have less brain activity during psychedelic trips than in sober reality. And what most people are pointing to is that in sober reality, your brain's working incredibly hard to filter out stuff, to
hmm.
not give you a direct experience of reality, because when you experience reality directly, it's so intense, it's hard to function. It's hard to get around, to
Right.
think of our ancestors, to hunt, to survive, right? So the brain evolved to filter out so much of the details and the sensoriness of this present moment. And it did great for survival, but it didn't do great for being present, for enjoying the moment, for seeing the magical beauty of nature or architecture, or just this moment without the filter of the thought stream that we normally have in
Right.
sober reality. So it seems like for the first time in your life, you had a very intense, direct experience of that, of like, you're just looking at this building and your whole world, your whole reality is this building. And
Absolutely. That's the
yeah,
best way. You're truly, what is it, Eckhart Tolle? Be here now. You're
yeah,
truly here now. There is no background noise, no, oh my gosh, to-do list in running in your brain, like, oh, I need to go to this appointment, or none of that. It's
yeah,
completely just not present. And the only thing I would add, because I think you did a wonderful explanation of it, is the science. I think they call it, and again, I'm not going to do justice to it either, but it's called, everyone has their own default mode network,
hmm,
DMN,
yeah,
and it's how you traditionally live life. The same, you know, worries you have, the same excitements you have. It's all kind of there's patterns and everyone has their own. And when you're on a psychedelic such as LSD, the blood flow, like if they were to run a scan of your brain, the blood flow is completely different. The pathways are different. And therefore your default mode is just not there. And
Yeah.
therefore you're able to kind of think literally outside the box, but any way that you want to. And almost like I mean, psychedelics are also tied to brain plasticity, neuroplasticity, which is that, the way it is isn't necessarily how it has to be. And your brain is forever changing and evolving. It's pruning, it's also growing. Like there's just a lot of shaping you can do to your mindset. And psychedelics just enables you to kind of literally tap into it. And I think that's why people make such drastic change. I don't even want to say drastic, but just like it could be 6 months after, it could be 2 years later, but people just change dramatically in areas that it's like, you've been telling your best friend to do X, Y, and Z, and then they go on their trip and they're like, of course I'm going to do X, Y, Z. And they just do it so easily. Something that was so scary and difficult before is just like, why wouldn't I do that? It's just like crazy what it does.
I think Michael Pollan talks about this in his book. He calls them like duh moments, where people will be addicted to cigarettes for 20 years. They do one psychedelic trip and then they stop. And when you ask them to explain why'd you stop, what finally helped you to stop smoking, they were like, people will report, well, I realized that I was hurting my lungs and my body and making myself sick, and that seemed like a bad thing to do. And it's like,
Right.
duh, why did you think of that? Why did you think of that the last 25 years?
Correct.
And it's, because another beautiful metaphor, I heard this from Michael Pollan, I don't remember, he attributes it to somebody else, is something that a psychedelic trip can do is like you have a hill with snow, and the default mode network is you find one way to get down this hill, maybe a few, maybe you have 2 or 3, 4 ways. And so you dig a groove into the snow, right, over time. Just like you make a path when you go on a hike, you'll see there's trees everywhere, and then there's one path everybody walks down all the time. And your brain, your decision making is similar to where it's like, okay, I feel a little bit of anxiety, I feel a little bit of boredom, I know the exact path to take, I've taken it the last 10 years, right? And you just fall into that groove. And the metaphor is, after a psychedelic trip, it's fresh snow. Or even during a fight, where and all of a sudden you go, that normal path of pick up cigarettes, of go back to the abusive relationship, or the toxic relationship, go down a personal thing, go down the self-hate or the self-destructive. All of a sudden you go, whoa, like I know I like to go down this way, but that's a bad decision. Let me try something else. Let me try creating a new path. And that's, I believe, again, a poor man's neuroscientist, that relates to the neuroplasticity of you can create new circuits basically in your brain, in your behavior. And that's a lot of the research is showing that that's one of the best benefits of psychedelics, why it helps so much with breaking bad habits, creating new good habits. It's sort of a fresh start. And that's, one of my favorite metaphors for it. So any thoughts on that?
I love that one. I think that's a powerful one. It's definitely just, I feel like, honestly, I think about so many people in my life who I consider stuck, who are just like me or had similar experiences. You could be stuck on anything in life, right? And I always am like, man, and it's a lot of times family, right? Family members, people from childhood, people I care a lot about, that I want the best for them. And I know they're stuck. They know I'm stuck. And I'm just like, damn, you just need to go on LSD. Because not that it's a cheat, it's not that it's a shortcut or cheating. But I tried everything. Like I went to therapy on and off for years. I did all the journaling, all the meditation, and I really tried to do the inner work, and all of that really did get me places. But I think LSD is just another tool in the toolbox of helping you get there, right? Like there's just things that we're wired naturally. Like I think I'm wired naturally to be anxious. It's just I see it in my family, I see it in myself, and now it's way, way less than what it used to be. But it's just the way I'm wired, right? So I can do all these things to try and completely eliminate it, but I don't think that's actually, even possible. Maybe I can reduce it a lot, but LSD just helps me like fast track that success.
Totally. I
And
would like.
one,
Go ahead.
oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, I would like to underline that I think it's important that you did do all those things first. So let's say somebody comes along, they've never done a day of therapy, they haven't journaled, they haven't meditated. It's not a fix-all to just go do a psychedelic. You're not going to do
Right.
LSD. The fact that you were working on it means you had a handle on your stuff, even though you didn't feel like you were getting any sort of progress through the traditional route. I think that work that you were doing leading up to it I would venture to say I'm positive it helped a lot. So that's just something I'd like to, for any listeners out there, wherever you are on your journey, you don't think, well, I'm not going to try to meditate or journal or go to therapy because I have the cheat code. It's not a cheat code to do psychedelics. They can be dangerous, which we will touch on a little bit, especially for certain people, especially with certain genetic predispositions. So I would just like to say, I think all that stuff helped, and the LSD was maybe like the performance enhancer that just helped you to break through that particular stuck point. So I do believe they all go together. Any thoughts on that?
Absolutely. I agree with you completely. And to your point on it's not for everyone, I agree. I'm sure there's definitely specific scenarios. The person is just not either at the right stage or at the right time or just isn't the right fit. That being said, I will say, out of those group of friends back when I lived in New York, including my roommate, he told me his first trip was downright awful. Um, he did it while on a like boys trip, I think skiing or something in Michigan, and they were in a cabin, and I guess they got snowed in, something like that. And his first trip was literally being stuck in a cabin,
It's not the
staring at
best
the
setting.
snow.
It's
And he
not the
said it was absolutely horrendous. That being said, he
yeah.
also said, I would do it again in a heartbeat. You know,
Mm-hmm.
even the shitty 8 hours that your trip could be, which has a potential. It's never really happened to me. Yeah, I've had some darker moments, but like as does I think everyone.
Yeah.
But he still, as well as other people, say they would still do it, similar to like people who do ayahuasca and had a awful time, which I know those people too. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. No, absolutely. And that's definitely true that a bad there's no such thing as bad trips. That's something it's kind of a philosophy. When I feel like I'm going down one of those rabbit holes, right? Or sometimes I call it the cave. You're kind of going into the cave. And I have this thing often where I'll start to think about something. Mushrooms is my thing. I'll be on mushrooms. I'll start to think about something. I go, oh man, I don't want to go there. And that's like a perfect trigger for me of you got to go there, bro. Like now's the time to do it, right?
That's brave.
Yeah, and so you got to kind of have this hero I don't know, gunslinger, badass or whatever attitude of like, okay, it might suck, it might be very scary to do something like have a bad 8-hour LSD trip, but it's not actually a bad trip because it's going to teach you something. No matter what, you're going to come out the other side of it, and you're going to know way more about yourself. So just with that caveat, like if you're considering doing this for the first time and you go, oh my God, it was a terrible experience. Why would I do that? Why would I do that to myself again? Take a step back and go, well, why was it a terrible experience? What can you learn about the fact that, what did it show you about yourself? And it sounds like in your experience and in mine, as far as friends that uh, everyone that I know that has had a bad trip has gone, oh, I learned actually, like, it wasn't the drug's fault. There was stuff inside of me I needed to work out. And then
Yeah.
almost every time, the second time around, they start to, you just become so much more comfortable with yourself, your own psyche, your own inner world, that you can kind of roll with the punches a whole lot better. So just like to say that.
Absolutely. My only addition to that is I think expectations is really important when you
It's
go
huge.
into any sort of experience. Um, I would not, anyone trying it for their first time or ever, I would not tell them to expect this magical, like, aha, at the end where it's like, I have it all figured out. Because
Yeah.
by no means have any of my trips ever felt that way. It's more like a day of euphoria, enjoying nature, enjoying wherever you are and truly being in the moment. That's what the present moment feels like. The effects are come later and they come with time, and they're not always measurable, right? So for me, it was like, okay, I did leave my job, I did leave this and that, but sometimes it's just things like, wow, I used to think so black and white. And now I see things in the gray that I just never did. And I can speak to that because I have similar experiences. So I feel like my point is that it's not always an immediate effect. The day
Yeah.
of, the next day, you're like this brand new person. But even if you had the worst trip and your brain still got that experience of being outside of the default mode network,
Yeah.
thinking differently, right? It's still learned from that, despite how, you know, awful the day was. And that in and of itself will translate to positive outcomes.
Very, very well said. Very cool. Okay, so we sort of did this podcast backwards from where I normally do. I normally start with the practical and move into the spiritual, but we're sort of so much touching on the spiritual. I want to see if we can pivot a little bit into, can you talk about, so to me, psychedelics can help you tap into the spiritual realm. And the other ways to say that would be to tap into presence, to tap into the magic that this moment is, that the default mode network just can't connect to. That normal sober reality, it takes a lot of work, it takes meditation, it takes certain intentionality to tap into it. I've made it to the point now in my life where I can go on a hike stone cold sober and like have a magical experience listening to the birds sing, watching the sun shine through the trees. But that's like, that took work. It took intentionality. I've meditated every day for over 1,000 days straight. Like there's a lot of things that go into that. And I've had periods in my life where I wasn't doing any of that, and life was just had this fog over it, just like this haze, right? And it's like,
I know the fog
yes,
very
and
well.
and you have Ram Dass. Are you familiar with that name? Did I bring him up last night? Yeah, Ram
I
Dass.
love Ram Dass.
He's my homie. I love Ram Dass people. Ram Dass talks about it as a fire that we're sort of born with this raging fire in our soul. When we're a kid, the world is amazing. It's magical. It's beautiful. It's scary. Everything's new and interesting. And slowly over time, the fire sort of tempers down, and then puberty hits, and then life just crushes you. And by the time you're maybe in your early 20s, or life has happened, it's almost like it's all ash. The fire is gone, right? Speaking metaphorically, of course, but and then few people never sort of get that amber, or the amber's sort of there, but they're never aware of that original fire ever for the rest of their lives. That's maybe sad to say, but that's maybe the majority of people. But some people sort of have some sort of a reminder. They find somebody like Ram Dass, they do a psychedelic, or something, maybe it's art or writing or poetry or music, that can just remind them of that amber, that little spark. And if you're lucky, you meet a person or two, or you find a community, or find a teacher, and you learn how to fan that amber back and bring the fire back again in your life. And I'm using that metaphor. I'm lucky enough to have the fire going for me now. And I had long periods of my life where it didn't. And I have friends that I can help to fan their fire, and they can fan my fire. And it's a really cool spiritual community. So with that as a metaphor, in your own life, was there a time when the fire felt like it was totally out? And was there a time where it felt like it got lit again?
Absolutely. It's kind of crazy that you're bringing this up because it's an area I've been wanting to kind of write about. I don't even know how to approach it because it's like such a monster of a topic.
It
But
is.
I guess since you're asking me
Give it a
live,
shot. Give it a shot.
I would say, so I'm nearing the end of my 20s, and I would say most of my 20s, that fire was out. Or there was, the best way I think about it is like kind of what you said about a fog or a veil. That veil was not lifted until very, very recently. And the way I think about it is just like most of my 20s, I was in survival mode. I was on autopilot. I was doing all the things that I was supposed to be doing, chasing money, chasing prestige, getting, checking off all these things on my list because I thought they would make me happy. And partially doing it because I wanted to prove to myself I could. but also thinking, if I get this, then I'll be happy. If I make it here, then I'll be happy. And always kind of having this sort of if then statement running its course in my mind. And the alongside being in survival mode is you're just numb. You're not really in touch with yourself. And every day is just like, it's just like, it's like living in a fog. And it's weird because I will say, like, the last 2 years, I feel the most awake, right? And I have the most painful moments and I have the most highest highs as of the
Yes.
last 2 years.
Yes.
And every time it's, up or down, I embrace it because that was never a thing for me. Even painful moments in the past, and this is like a tweet that's been sitting in my drafts forever because I don't know how to write this, but um I was numb to it. I told myself I didn't care. I told myself it didn't really matter. I would just take the L and be like, yeah, I'm fine. That didn't bother me. Hell fucking yeah, it bothered me. But I just couldn't even like access that side of me. And so
Yes.
now when something like that happens, I am so much more emotional. I'm like, I'll cry. Like I don't think I cried a lot in my 20s. I will like be sad and like really sad. Um, but it's like such a beautiful feeling because in the past it was like just out of reach. I couldn't touch it. And therefore you can't really process, if
Yeah.
you can't engulf yourself in sadness and let that moment just be what it is, like a shitty moment, or a shitty situation, whatever it is, heartbreak, losing someone. If you can't process it, then you're missing out on yet another beautiful part of life, which is like the pain and the sorrow, the highs and the lows. I grew up in a Christian household, so I know the Bible almost memorized. And like in the Bible, it talks about, you must know darkness to know light. You must know sorrow to know joy. All these opposites. And it's so fucking true. You can't really know one without knowing the other. And I feel like for most of my 20s, I never touched either of those ends of the spectrum. I was
Yeah.
always in the middle, thinking this is life and just so numb to everything.
Wow. Really, really good guess. You hit so you saw me taking notes. I hit some. You were saying stuff that I had to come back and touch. One, you said when you were okay. You're playing it down the middle, right? Because it's
Mhm.
safe. It's too scary to allow yourself to have too much hope and be too happy and go on that end. It's
Absolutely.
definitely too scary to let yourself feel what the sadness and the disappointment that you really are feeling. And so one thing I wrote down was heartbreak. And this is something I talked about with Duncan. My audience will know a lot about. You have to let your heart break, and that sucks. Everyone wants to protect their heart, right?
Mhm.
And I heard this story. I told it on the Duncan podcast, but it seems appropriate now. I heard a story of this man who he was married to a woman for 40 years, and he shared that his strategy was similar to yourself. And I totally agree. In my 20s, very similar timeline. When I was about 27, 28 was when finally I opened up and allowed myself to feel life and be sad and feel joy and like have the courage to, break out of down the middle, the safe route. So this man, he was married for 40 years. And he said he never wanted to love his wife too much because he was afraid if he did, he couldn't deal with the sadness of losing her. So he just sort of played it down the middle, just not too high, not too low, not
Wow.
get too excited, but not get too disappointed. And this is a very sad story. She passed away tragically in a car accident. And he said he knew right away, and he knows now many years later, that he played it wrong because it hurt just as much when he lost her as if he would have allowed it. And instead, he robbed himself of 40 years of fully loving this woman that he loved, but he was too scared to, right? And I hear this story and it is heartbreaking, but it's a great reminder to us of, hey, it sucks to make yourself vulnerable and open up your heart, but it really is the only safe bet, because the alternative is you're just going to be numb and dead to life. You're not going to be able to fully love and connect to another person, to life itself, to your work, whether it's writing or any sort of creative work or whatever it is, you got to open up your heart and know, like 99% chance, 99.9, it's going to break. It's going to hurt. And to embrace the break and the hurt. Because the alternative is spending your whole life avoiding that. And then you get like this booby prize. You get this fake gift at the end of, well, my heart never got broken. Like, yeah, but you didn't live. You didn't love. You didn't experience what the heart is made to experience, which is, true connection and love and all that. So I don't know if that was on topic what you were sharing, but that inspired me to tell that story. A few other things you mentioned, the when you were playing it down the middle, the then I'll be happy. You were trying to achieve, right? You were
Right.
all the things that society tells you, get a good job, status, be interesting, be popular, all those things. Something my best friend and I say to each other all the time, it's a running joke, is then I'll be happy. Like it's just a joke we'll say to each other when it'll be like, we're trying to advance in our careers. We work in the same field. We'll say, man, if I can get this new job, it's going to be really cool. I'm going to make more money. I can start doing this, doing that. And then there'll be like a pause. And then my friend will say, yeah, and then you'll be happy, right? It's just this running joke of like, it's cool. Yes, this is something we'll touch on too. It's cool to strive. It's cool to improve, but never fall into the illusion that the next thing's going to make you happy. It's got to be here and now. And then from a place of happiness and joy and fulfillment, you can strive for better and, crafting your life in the way that you want to, improving and all that. But if you're empty and trying to fulfill yourself with achievements, material, relationships, it's the then I'll be happy joke. It's the then I'll be happy fallacy. It's not going to make you happy. You got to figure out a way to do it here and now.
It's the damn truth. And the only thing you're spot on with it. I think the only note is I feel like it's more predominant in men than in women.
I would agree.
I would say most of my 20s and even growing up, I was a tomboy. I always vibed more with my guy friends than my girlfriends. And so even when I was working in the corporate world, I tried to be like the guys and I tried to model their behavior because I saw that as the way to success, right? And I think it's more predominant in men just culturally that you seek status, you seek achievement as a means to, happiness, as a means to gratification, as a means to, okay, I've made it, now I have self-worth, all of this. Where I think women in general are obviously tend to be more in touch with their emotional side, with their, softer side. But I just think it's so rampant and it's so much the norm. And I think that there's been an awakening in the last few years, especially with COVID, especially with the Great Resignation, all of what's going on. And I hope that that's where we're skewing. I'm not really sure, to be honest, but yeah.
Yeah,
I agree with you.
Yeah, absolutely. Well put. And I think that rolls us into something I mentioned ahead of time. Now we're kind of did it backwards from spiritual to practical, but this is practical, but it's importantly practical. You're touching on something that I've been with the LSB, this podcast, its newsletter, sort of its sister project. What I've been trying to touch on for a long time is exactly that you're talking about, which is maybe it's a little more naturally feminine to be able to actually do what you want to do with your life, not worrying about how it's perceived from other people, how what status it puts you at, how society views it, but actually what naturally comes from your heart, right? What comes from your soul, what feeds your soul, your calling. And yeah, so the newsletter is touching on finding your calling, pursuing it, but with the caveat that I don't hear addressed much, or at least not very well in our culture, of not falling under the illusion you got to get it to then be happy. Like, okay, let's say your calling's writing. I'll be happy once I publish my first book. Like, you got to be able to see through the illusion of that. Like, you got to actually be happy here and now writing out that shitty first draft, right? And feel a sense of contentment all the way along, right? And that's something I see in your work, in your writing and in your tweets, is you're often touching on that seeming dichotomy, but I don't think it's that. I think it's a balance of how to uh, love yourself enough to improve, to do good work, to do good art, to grow on Twitter or X, right? To be successful in your business, but never let it stretch so far that you are postponing your happiness or your self-love or your self-acceptance for once you get something. So, any thoughts on that?
As always, I 100% agree. It's the journey, it's not the destination.
Yeah.
And the thing I like to challenge myself with, but also, the people in my life that I love and care about is, something I wish I challenged myself with sooner is, who are you when you take away everything else? When you strip away your career, when you strip away, all your accomplishments, the things that make you proud of yourself, when you take all of that away, anything that's tangible, who are you? Do you even know the answer to that question? I
Love
am
it.
just starting to answer that. I would say for the longest time I didn't. And I think that it can also change. But I think I have this feeling that a lot of people go through life, probably a lot more life than we've even lived yet, and haven't answered that question. And I
Yeah.
think the moment that you sort of start to answer that or even just approach that area is when things just start to become crystal clear. Like for me, this veil was lifted, maybe 1 or 2 years ago. And like ever since then, I, like you, have these moments where I'll be on the street and see the most beautiful flower and spend 5 minutes like photographing it and like just smelling it and like obsessed with things like a 5 year old. But
Mm.
like I never in my entire life would have I always would have walked past it, not even noticed it. Now I notice the smallest things, and the smallest things are what give me the most pleasure. Um, and I just noticed that this is a shift in me. This is me kind of connecting to my true core self.
Yeah.
Aside from being a woman, being, an Indian, being all these labels that I could put on myself, being a corporate achiever, whatever it is, like none of that means anything. It's all about who you are. And it sounds so damn
No,
corny,
it's
but it's
not. It's actually
so true.
very deep. I love the hell out of that. It's really, really, it's funny. My same friend, Alonzo, I'll call him out, that we do the then I'll be funny or then I'll be happy, right? Then I'll be happy. He'll ask me that all the time. He'll say, okay, so my job is I'm an electrical technician. What if you weren't an electrical technician? Who would you be?
Hmm.
Right? What if you weren't an American? He's a Mexican American. What if I wasn't Mexican? What if I wasn't a man? You know, what if I wasn't a person? Like you keep taking away labels and stripping back and and stripping back. And this is something I have a guru in my life, and it's very hard to say in the English language, but basically what you are is you can't really throw a word because as soon as you throw a word, it's whatever. But some of my favorites are like your emptiness,
Huh.
your empty awareness in this moment. You're that which is looking out of these eyes, right? It's not your eyes that are seeing, but you're the awareness that's seeing in this moment. And everything else is an add-on. It's a label. It's a useful label. It's not bad. It's not like it's an illusion or whatever, but it's a partial truth. The ultimate truth is that all that stuff is just labels, ideas, concepts. At the core, it's just empty timelessness and eternity that we call this moment.
Oof, deep.
Mic drop.
There's no follow-up to that.
This is what happens. See, sometimes you get too deep and then you got nowhere else to go with the podcast.
Yeah, what you were saying kind of brought me back to something. I'm thinking about people who might be watching this, right? Who
Mm-hmm.
who want to experience this awakening or who are just starting to infringe on it. Um, for me, how I knew that you might not be visibly stuck. You might think that you're doing a-okay and great and not in need of any change, right? But I would challenge that by asking yourself, like for me, I had this whole sort of like alter ego personality that I used to, catapult me to what I thought I wanted most of my life, but at least for the last few years. And it's this facade that I wore. And I will say the facade was extremely sarcastic. I'm still sarcastic to this day, but extremely sarcastic and
What
cynical.
what did we call it the other day?
I
Spicy.
Spicy.
It's all right
Yeah.
to be spicy
So
sometimes.
Yeah, extremely sassy, but like in all of like you can take any trait and there's a positive way of taking it and there's a negative way of taking it. And I feel like I was fully on the negative side of things and telling myself I didn't care and all of these things. And now I am this super bubbly and I would hate that description for me any other time of my life.
I know the feeling.
Bubbly, friendly, full of life, positive. I act like a child all the fucking time. And these are all things that I would be embarrassed of years ago. I'd be like, oh my God, no.
Yeah, yeah.
Let's put that side of jazz away. But now I'm like, hell fucking yeah, that's me. And like
Embracing it.
I just feel like I'm embodying this joy that I tried to put aside for so long because I always wore these like other traits as my battle scars, as my hallmark traits of like, yeah, I'm jaded, I'm sarcastic, I'm a cynic, and all these
Yeah.
things that are just bullshit. I don't know
Yes.
if that
Yes.
makes sense.
It makes
Looking back,
100% sense.
yeah.
I think sarcasm is a defense mechanism, like first and foremost, because sarcasm is a way of protecting your heart. Because if it's like, oh yeah, this is so cool, or I'm so excited about this, right? That sort of is a way of going like, it's very vulnerable to be like, no, I'm excited. Like no,
Mm.
you're cool. I like you. It's funny. I had a little bit when the first time we talked. I'm very socially awkward. I grew up in a cult, so I'm still learning stuff. Like at the end of our conversation, I was like, Jazz, we're friends now. And like as soon as I said that, I was like, dude, like what's wrong with you? Well, the alternative is like just playing it cool and being like, oh, it was really nice to talk. And that was like an example for me of like, the safer bet is to just be cool, be sarcastic, whatever. And as I keep getting old, this is why like we're embarrassed by all of our parents, why my kids are probably embarrassed by me, because eventually you stop trying to be cool and you start being
Mm.
real. And when you're
Yeah,
real, you say embarrassing stuff. And like you said, you're bubbly, all these things that were cringe for you a few years
right.
back, you're now embracing because it is actually more true to you to be silly,
Absolutely.
to express yourself in the moment. And yeah.
And people who embody those traits are literally who I gravitate towards. If you're raw, you're vulnerable, you're putting your cringy shit out there and
Yeah.
owning it,
Yeah.
you have all my respect. Like those are the people that I want to surround myself with because you bring that out in me. And it's just like a sign of like how much it's just a sign of growth and a sign of,
Yeah.
self-awareness, but also just not giving a fuck. Like a lot of
Yeah.
people like to say they don't give a fuck, but they really do.
Yeah.
I'm there too, right? But
Mhm.
you really don't care is when you put all of it out there for everyone to judge and just literally don't care.
Yeah, no, exactly. It's funny. I was reading. I think it was one of your posts that I believe did really well, where you were saying, I'm something like, I'm not gonna lie, I don't like most transformative stories on Twitter, and I agree because they're a great storytelling tactic, and they can be very inspirational. But for me, they fall flat for the exact reason you put in your post of they present the after, right? The before is, fat, unhealthy, and now they're ripped and healthy for life. The before was socially awkward and shy. Now I'm a badass that makes friends, and
Right.
yes,
Like, tell me about the bag of Doritos that you ate on your couch
we all
yesterday,
know
and
you ate
tell me
one
about the
yesterday.
panic attack that you had last week before the meeting. Because
Yes,
I've been there both times, both
yeah,
scenarios. Tell
yes.
me that shit. That's interesting to me.
And 100%. Yeah. And I love that so much. And that's pointing to what you're talking about of a certain level of maturity where you can own your transformation. Like, okay, myself personally, I lost 60 pounds and I've kept it off for a few years. I can own that
Wow.
transformation and say, I am a food addict. Like, if it's not a daily thing, I'm going to put the weight back on because I freaking love food and I don't, really like to work out. I really love walking, but I don't feel like doing it all the time. And, like that is so much more valuable to share with people than just like, hey, I used to be this, now I'm perfect. You can be perfect too. Like, come on, man, nobody's perfect. We all know that. Like give me the real stuff. And I think that's getting to, there's a certain fearlessness, a certain bravery that goes along with like really, both saying, owning your accomplishments and going, it still is a daily thing. And I slip up and I mess up. And I'm just trying to do a little bit better today. Some days I take an L and I like learn the lesson and then I, try to get it back over the next couple of days. And that's so much more real. Something I really appreciate about your work and something I I think you said in there, like, let's normalize that. Like, I agree. I'm on the bandwagon. Let's make that real. I'm going to commit to trying to do that a little bit more. And I hope other people do too.
Yay. If just one person reads that and starts to put themselves out there. I mean, I try and follow people who do that. Like in life, I feel like all of my social media, I always tweak my algorithm to be people who level me up, right?
Yeah.
And I see that on Twitter. There's definitely some accounts that are really out there with their vulnerability, and I love it. But I don't think it's the norm. But it should be. So perhaps there's that potential to kind of, swing it in that direction.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's funny. I had an actual, we're getting now down to more tangible, practical stuff. I had an actual experience today. Were you on Dakota's call this morning at 8?
I wanted to be. I couldn't make
Okay.
it.
Okay. It's a good thing you were, because I feel like I embarrassed myself. I don't know. Maybe not. I asked to speak. So this one guy came on and he said, Dakota, I got a question for you. He's very kind of sarcastic, a little goofy. It felt genuine. It felt just sort of whatever. He was like eccentric. And he goes, what is good in life? And Dakota goes, I don't know, God. And kind of he was trying to be funny back, right? And it just sort of fell flat. And he's like, none of you guys have seen Conan the Barbarian? And as soon as he said that, I was like, oh, I know the quote, because I've seen the movie, right? I just committed to memory, and people in my little podcast circle know it. So I requested to speak because I just was going to say the quote. He's like, somebody raise your hand and say the quote. So I request to speak. And then a few people were in front of me in line. A few other people asked genuine questions about the space, and they were talking about LinkedIn, how to grow on LinkedIn. And the guy who asked the Conan the Barbarian quote jumped off. I didn't know he did. And then Dakota goes, Nick, you want to say something? So I jump on and I go, yeah, what's good in life? It's so bad. So bad. Because it's very misogynistic, like manly. I go, to totally crush your enemy, watch them run in fear, and it's like lament in the weeping of their women or something like that. It's just, so I just said that. I muted myself. Then Dakota goes, that's cool. I'm going to get that tattooed on my butt. And then he's like, Nick, did you have anything else to say? I unmuted myself again, and I was like, oh yeah, just this is really cool. And so it was like 120 people on there. I said something about, he was like, are you walking? I was like, of course, I'm walking. And, I hear a few people are on treadmills. I'm walking the streets. I made some joke about being for the streets. Then I jumped off. And then the votability hangover, I was like, do all these people think like I actually think that's what's good in life? Like I was just quoting a movie, and but anyway, the lesson here is at the end of all that, I was like, you know what, man, if anyone's gonna not get it, it's cool. Like I can't live my life being you can't give perfect context to everything that you say. Like sometimes you're just gonna be goofy and funny, and you got to just live with it. You know what I mean? But yeah, that was just a real life.
I love that for you. I think you're always gonna. I mean, I listen. I come from South Asian world or heritage. I'm used to being judged, and at some point, you just gotta let it go because it's always gonna happen. Someone can always take something you took out of context and make it be the thing that they think of when they think about you. But my mantra is always, because I feel I've had those moments where I'm like, I know I'm being judged and I feel like shit. And I tell myself, well, if someone's going to go to lengths to judge me based on this one out of context quote or thing that they don't even know who I am, that's on you. Like you're a judgmental person.
And they kind of did you a favor. Like, okay, cool. Yeah. Then absolutely. I know we don't
like, please
fuck with each other. We don't vibe. Yeah.
Right. So I used to care so much, but like, it's just going to bring you down, and it's never going to stop. There's always going to be some sort of judgment, but it's up to you whether it matters or not.
100%. Yeah. Very well put. We're at over an hour, Jas.
I'm good. So you can keep me going.
Yeah. Okay, cool. We've touched on so many really cool things. Let me just ask again, we're in the practical realm. What would you like to share as far as your vision right now for, you know what? We could talk a little bit about podcasting too. Is this your first podcast?
This is my first podcast.
Whoop, whoop. Crack the champagne bottles. Very cool. What is your history with wanting to do a podcast of your own? of listening to podcasts in general. I can just very quickly share, and people that listen to this a lot know, podcasting was like calling to my soul for 7 years before I finally recorded the first one. It's been like one of the second most rewarding creative project in my life besides writing. Met so many cool people. The 2 podcasts I did with Duncan are like absolute bucket list, I mean, there's stuff with my daughters that's very meaningful, but like just cool shit that's happened in my life is doing those 2 podcasts with Duncan. So this podcasting to me was like something I was scared to do forever. I put off. I finally did it. It's been insanely rewarding for me. And I felt a little bit that we talked about, like maybe that was in the mix for you too, something you've been thinking about doing for a long time.
So yes and no. I will say I have been propositioned for podcasts before. I as you can tell, I can talk. So
very well.
I've had a lot of like one-off conversations, even recently with new friends on Twitter and all, where the conversation is just so out there, and we're like, damn, we should have recorded that. Like that could have been a whole podcast. But honestly, so here's how I think about it. I've always wanted to be like, I don't know if I'd want it to be my career necessarily, but public speak. And at my first consulting firm, this is something I'm really proud of. I competed with like 75 people at my firm to win like a TED Talk spot. It was me and like 4 men who won. And it was everyone from like analyst level to like partner level. So there was like all ages, all levels, all backgrounds. And I was the only girl that got a spot. And I was like, so gassed.
Yeah, that's something to be proud of.
Yeah, and this was in the middle of New York City, and in a skyscraper. I got to give a TED Talk, not really a TED Talk, but like a company equivalent of a TED Talk in front of a room of strangers. And it was a very personal speech, and like I actually want to take that speech, I have it somewhere, and like make it into a thread or something one day. But the moment of like going up on stage, and mind you, I felt completely fine up until like 90 seconds before going up on the spotlight, and I had complete amnesia. Had to take 2 shots of tequila and was like, definitely like, I never watched the recording of this speech on purpose because I honestly don't want to know what I look like, because I was a hot mess as far as like super nervous, super nervous.
It's really interesting. Yeah, it hit 90 seconds before, huh?
I was like, I got this. I know all the points I want to hit. I'm going to fucking blow it out of the room, Yeah. And when it came time to speak, it's like I lost the ability to speak. So regardless of that, it was one of the most exhilarating experiences I've ever had. Yeah. And the speech was very, very personal, to the point where I was almost caught in tears giving it, because it was about this childhood stuff and whatever. And regardless of how it went, to this day, I don't know. I've never opened the box of watching the recording. But I will say, like, that was an experience like none other. And so not that I necessarily want to give speeches, but I do want to one day give a TED Talk. But I just know I like talking about things I care about. So whether that translates into a podcast, maybe it's just hosting on Twitter Spaces, maybe it's actually doing public speaking. I don't know what that looks like, but it's something that makes me feel really, really alive. And, I'm in the stage of life where I'm trying to do all the things that make me feel alive. So that's where I'm coming from.
That's really cool. I can say you definitely have a talent for it. I could see you doing YouTube videos. I know it's a whole new can of worms, learning how to video edit and all that sort of stuff, but I can see you doing YouTube videos. I could see you being a really good public speaker. And I would encourage you that your own subjective experience is that it energizes you, makes you feel alive, is a great sign that it could maybe be a calling. It could be something that could really energize you, and you may have a talent for it. It may feed your soul, all that kind of stuff. So I hope you do pursue it more. Podcasting, I have a bias towards podcasting. I love it because I love the dialogos. Have you heard that term before? It's kind of an abstract term. It comes from ancient Greek philosophy. Dialogos is the wisdom found in dialogue. And it's this idea that, I thought you'd like it. It's the idea that, I bring something to the table, Jas brings something to the table, but dialogos is the third thing that emerges, right? That I can only tap into so much wisdom, articulate so well, you can only by yourself, but there's a certain magic. The dialogos is the wisdom that arrives from the two of us be in conversation together. We can uncover new things. I think conversation, I heard this once, I should really write it down, means to converse means to like dig. So it's like two people digging into something and finding something new that one person through a single monologue you can't find. Through dialogue you dig and you can uncover new gems and new wisdom that isn't there. So I have a bias towards podcasts. This is for being your first time you're the best first time podcast guest that I've ever had. So for whatever that's worth, but you can see personally, subjectively how this feels and maybe if it's something you'd like to do more. But either way, I would encourage you to speak. I think that there's a lot of potential for you.
Thank you for such a compliment. I'm floored. And if I ever have a podcast, I might just have to name it Dialogos.
Oh my God, that's a great idea.
Dope.
I don't think it exists. I don't think there's a podcast called Dialogos.
Trademarking it right after this.
Get it? Oh, I'm jealous. Why did I think of that? Very nice. Very good. I'll send you some stuff. Have you heard of another sort of abstract dude, John Vervaeke? He's he's a cognitive scientist out of Toronto. I'll send you some of his stuff because he's where I first heard the term Dialogos from, and he's sort of made it his life mission. He's had thousands of conversations with people. They're all over YouTube. There are a lot of small. He's done some really big guests, but he's done a lot of just small. He just talks to other professors and cognitive scientists and stuff, and he's sort of made it his life mission to serve Dialogos. So he's super out there. He's one of those guys, like he almost invented his own language. It's sort of hard. It takes a lot of listening to really understand what he's saying, but I'll send you some sort of entry level John Vervaeke. I think you'll really vibe with it.
100% I will. So please send me all the things. I love anything like that, like play on words or learning the history or ideology of words, language in general.
Yeah.
That's a whole other rabbit hole. So yes, please send it to me.
Well, okay. To wrap this up, I don't want to take you too long. Well, this is like, I think I mentioned this in our phone conversation. Any good podcast that I've ever had, any good conversation I ever had, always has this feeling of like, we got more to talk about now than when we started. So I have that feeling. I can't open up all the threads again, or else we'll be here all day and night, and we got to sleep. So I have countless notes here. We could do many more podcasts in the future and talk about all sorts of cool stuff. But right on. And we've been sort of talking about it the whole time, but I'm going to hit you with this is more on brand for LSB. If you had to try to explain what's going on here, what is reality? What is this moment? No wrong answers. Be as poetic or practical as you like. What is this?
That's way more up my alley. I'm gonna try and be poetic and concise. Not my strengths, but I would say, to start off, we are spiritual beings having a human experience, and I think most people see it the other way around. And there's another quote. It's from Shakespeare. I am not gonna. Again, my recall is terrible, but he talks about, I think it's in Hamlet, there's more things in the universe or under the sky and stars than you could ever dream of, Horatio. Again, I probably butchered it, but certain quotes like that, lines like that, completely are on point with how I view life. I am very spiritual. I also grew up religious, and I still consider myself a strong Christian, but I think that the way I view the world and life is just, none of it can be defined by a nicely fit structure, definition, anything. The way I see it is that, all it takes is looking outside, looking at nature, look at the design of a leaf, look at human anatomy, look at, miracles, medical miracles, look at just all the things in life that cannot be explained. There are far more things that can't be explained than can be explained. Our definition of science and medicine changes day by day. This is something coming from where having worked in medicine. And my feeling is that we are just touching the 1% of knowledge. Like, we have barely touched the surface, went past the surface. And I feel that life is just this mystical experience, and that the moment you start to open your eyes to it, you can't not see it.
Mm.
And that's how I'm going to end it.
That's powerful. That's a mic drop. The moment you start to open your eyes, you can't see it. Yeah.
You can't unsee it. Yeah.
Can't unsee it. Yeah. Yeah. Very beautiful. Very nice way to end it. You're awesome. You want to promote anything? Plug your ex or anything else, any business related stuff, throw it out there.
Well, my handle is Natural Prozac for maybe now obvious reasons, but
Love that name.
follow me, message me. I'm always down to connect, especially with, people who have interesting ideas and philosophies. And I'm hoping to come out with a blog or a newsletter at some point because I really do want to kind of hone in on some of the areas that I'm touching. I've gotten feedback from people that they want to know more. So I'm like, okay, let's do it. So yeah, catch me on Twitter.
Right on. Follow her on Twitter. If you listen to this whole podcast, you definitely are going to love all the posts that Jas is putting out there. So that was awesome. Thank you so much. And we'll do it again sometime.
Thank you, Nick. This was awesome. Bye.
Thank you so much for watching all the way to the end. If you enjoyed this conversation, please hit the like button. If you want to watch more podcasts like this in the future, subscribe and hit the notification to be notified when they come up. If you want to keep up with me, I am on Twitter now every day at write with a W already. Link to that will be in the description. If you want to check out my writing, I publish a newsletter every Friday through Substack. Link to that will also be in the description. I love you guys, and let's keep doing this together. Peace.